Good evening, everybody. Thank you very much for having me. I was really thrilled to be asked by the London Cycling Campaign to join you today and to recognise the outstanding achievements of some of you who are in the room tonight. When I was preparing for this evening, I went online and I asked on Twitter, does anyone know any good cycling jokes? And somebody said, Glasgow. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Mark Ames and I'm the editor of iBike London blog. Since 2009, I have been writing about cycling in London and charting the changing face of campaigning here in our exciting home city. Another joke, I once took bicycle training, but I could only afford half of the lessons. Now I ride a unicycle. Sorry, was that a bit tired? Did you hear about the fixie that kept throwing its riders off? It was a vicious cycle. Thank you very much. I'm here all week. So before we move on to tonight's awards, LCC asked me to share with you a few nuggets I've picked up over the past 5 years of campaigning in the online world. So without further ado, we will move on, hopefully if my magic button works. Haha, yes. Tip number 1, always talk online. Nearly all of you will recognise some of these logos here. Facebook, Blogger, Twitter, Instagram, Pinterest, Flickr, Bebo, WordPress. These are all online platforms that have very quickly become household names. But what is social media? Social media. The term social media refers to the use of web-based and mobile technologies to turn communication into an interactive dialogue. Andreas Kaplan defines social media as a group of internet-based applications that allow the creation and exchange of user-generated content. Information used to be expressed in a very, very different way. Once upon a time, somebody would establish a position. Perhaps they'd write a book, and they would be the broadcaster of that position. People would hear about this idea or read this book, and they would be receivers. But they did this in isolation, unaware of other people doing the same, unable to share reactions and responses, or unable to establish a counter position unless they actually perhaps also wrote a book or whatever, and also became a broadcaster. Times have changed. Empowered by the internet, information is shared in a radically different way. Now, not only is there information out there, people can share it much more easily. They can pass on key messages and good ideas, and they can add their own opinions too. Consensus builds in an ever-increasing web of responses, and by default, everyone is both a broadcaster and also a receiver. Subsequently, good ideas spread really fast. And then even niche messages, say perhaps about cycling, they can achieve a large audience quickly and cheaply. To give you an idea of the scale of social media, there are roughly 200 million blogs currently being written around the world, and the equivalent of 5,000 new novels are being published on Blogger alone every day. Facebook receives more traffic than Google every day. And if it were a country, if you were to take Facebook's membership and count all of those members, if it were a country, its population is so large it would be the 3rd biggest in the world. In a nutshell, if you are not talking about what you're doing online, you're basically not talking about it at all. Let me give you an example. As well as cycling, I quite like swimming. And a colleague of mine at the swimming club organised a new members' evening. And I asked them how they advertised it because they complained to me that no new members came. And they said, well, we sent an email to our members. If you're going to campaign, you need to recruit an awful lot of hearts and minds along the way. And the online world is where you're going to find those hearts and minds. Which brings me very nicely to point number 2. Don't talk about cyclists. I know this sounds very counterintuitive, so do bear with me for a moment. What is everybody in the room? what is the one thing that binds you all together?
Human.
You're all cyclists. You're all humans and you're all cyclists. And what is it that as cyclists you all care about? It's cycling. And what does the world care about cyclists? There we go. Sad though it is, us cyclists are still very much a minority here in the UK and often the victim of prejudice too. It's not nice, but there is a very large group of people out there who hear the word cyclist and think tax dodger or scofflaw or pain in the backside. You could spend all your time trying to circumvent these prejudices, but that's always going to be an uphill struggle. So ask yourself this: if you were a local councillor with a somewhat tabloid leaning, which headline would you prefer to hear? £1 billion investment to give cyclists preferential treatment, or bold new plan to tackle the scourge of childhood obesity? It goes without saying that cycle schemes really should benefit cyclists. But if you couch it only in those terms, the only people who are going to be excited about the headlines are existing cyclists. Luckily, riding a bicycle has a multitude of other benefits, so you can create lots of stories which will interest and garner the support of a much, much wider group of people. So don't just talk about cyclists, talk about air pollution, talk about childhood obesity, talk about the isolation of the elderly, or improving local business, or increasing local property values. And I will personally buy dinner for whichever of you in this room is the first person to get a local rag to run the headline talking about a cycling campaign as a bold new plan to tackle the lack of local on-street parking. I make sure your messages get lots of people excited, not just us cyclists. Now, I'm talking to you about new media, but step number 3 is cultivate old media relationships. We love our friends in the newsrooms who churn out pages and pages of newspapers and hours of broadcasting every day. For all that I believe that the online world is an incredibly powerful tool, old media, especially local old media, still carries a very powerful punch. But here's the top secret about local media. Local journalists are desperate, and I mean desperate, for stories. They have to fill an entire newspaper with interesting stuff on budget, on time, every day. And I'm sure, as an example, you will have noticed that barely a week goes by without there being a news story in the newspapers about Crossrail. Their media strategy is phenomenal. Crossrail doesn't even open for another 4 years, but it is always in the newspapers. If Crossrail so much as buy a new spanner, they issue a press release about it. And as a subsequence, they've come to be relied upon as a useful, reliable source of stories to help fill up all of those newspaper pages. And you should do the same. Procure your local old media contacts, buy them a cup of coffee. God knows they need it. Every time you do something, tell them. Have you heard from a Peruvian adventure cyclist at your recent AGM? Write a press release about it. Did you stage a die-in outside your local Mercedes garage? Write a press release about it. Journalists are hungry for your story. But remember point number 2, don't talk about cyclists. And remember point number 1, talk online. Why only send the minutes of your AGM to the people who were actually there? They were there, they know what happened. Publish your minutes on your website, publish your minutes on your Facebook, publish your minutes on your Twitter, and so on. Which brings me very quickly on to point number 4, be shareable. And a few odd faces looking at me oddly in this room. What is shareable? I looked up the definition of shareable in the online dictionary, and it said capable of being shared, which I thought was a very good description. But in a wonderful contemporary twist, these little icons for Google and Cited and Facebook, which are on it, encouraged me to share the definition of shareable. Everything you do in your campaign should be shareable online. That is to say, you don't just put it online, but that people can talk about it on lots and lots of different platforms, like Twitter, like Facebook, and on their mobile telephones very easily, meaning that those circles of conversations can grow outwards and expand quickly. I know that this all sounds a bit pseudoscience-y, so bear with me. Is anyone in the room here from Camden? Hello Camden, hello. Camden Council have a Facebook page. This isn't the local cycling group, this is the council. And they have a Facebook page promoting cycling in their borough. It is a textbook example of how to create shareable content. They don't just use good platforms for sharing, they actually tailor their content to encourage people to share it. So they ask questions in their posts to provoke responses. They show, they don't just tell, they use images. They're light-hearted, they're often quite funny. You should all check it out. And when you do check it out, see how many likes and shares each of their posts is getting, because that is a new circle of conversation, a new circle of influence opening up right there. The growth in popularity of Twitter, I'm sure you'll all agree, has been explosive, and the cycling community is very well represented on it. And I know that many of you in this room are already on Twitter. But how many of you post on Twitter without first thinking about how people might react to the information that you're sharing online and what they might do with it? For example, one of the best ways of encouraging sharing is to show. So, the Hollywood actress Lauren Bacall passed away recently, and I remembered that she'd been in a Spin bicycle catalogue a long time ago, and it said something lovely about cycling. And I could have just said this on Twitter, oh, it's sad, Lauren Bacall died, she was in a bike catalogue. And that wouldn't be very interesting. So I went and looked online, and it was very easy. I found the catalogue, and there she was, looking wonderful with her bicycle with the chain on the wrong side. And so I decided to show, don't tell. So there she was, saying there's a wonderful companionship in cycling. And by showing this with an image from the catalogue, well, who wouldn't want to be companionable while cycling with Lauren Bacall? And that tweet started to go viral. In the space of an hour, it was retweeted 66 times. And that's how you get messages out there. There are other tricks for going viral. Repeat yourself across all your platforms. Don't just say it on Twitter, say it on Facebook, say it on Instagram, say it everywhere else that you have a presence. And use tricks to entice people in. Ask questions, use the question mark. Use exclaiming words, say wow, say amazing, words that draw in people's attention. And draw people in so that they actually have to click on the link that you provide. I don't know if you're all familiar with a website called BuzzFeed, but they have a very clever way of writing their headlines. They will say things like, check out our post of 7 photos of amazing new bicycles. You won't believe bicycle number 3. And when you read this, you're like, oh, I have to find out about bicycle number 3. And you click. And of course, it's never very exciting, but you're there, you read it, you take it on board. Be mobile friendly. Make sure your content can be viewed on a smartphone. I don't know about anyone else, but I do most of my internet browsing on my telephone now. And mix up your messages. So there we go. Point number 5, as we canter ever rapidly on, have fun. Cycling is a fundamentally joyous thing, and one of the most effective ways of increasing your online reach, inspiring new followers, and increasing the impact of your message is to convey that sense of fun and joyousness. It can't all be updates on campaigns, the latest awful truck accident, or the minutes of your recent AGM. In between all of the serious stuff, it's important to show your light side and have a bit of fun as well, because otherwise, why bother? So, I hope this fast and furious refresher on the online world has been useful, and please afterwards, if you want, do feel free to come up to me and ask questions, though I would ask that you keep your questions to less than 140 characters. You can find me online at ibitelondon.blogspot.com, or most often on Twitter at markbikeslondon. And so, from one great set of cycling advocates to another, let's start with the London Cycling Campaign Awards without any further ado. Thank you very much.